Hello, good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our Planet Positive Chemicals event here at the Japanese Pavilion. My name is Sophie Herman. I'm a partner with Systemiq and an author of the Planet Positive Chemicals report. Before we dive into the content, just a few words on logistics. We have headsets laid out over there. On channel 1, you will find Japanese simultaneous translation, and on channel 3, English. Online, for those that are participating through Zoom, welcome to all of you as well. You have also the choice of switching between Japanese and English. Tonight, we want to present to you the Planet Positive Chemicals report. We're very grateful to the Japanese Pavilion that we have the chance to talk about the topic. We think it's imperative to talk about chemicals because it's one of the hardest to abate sectors, arguably the hardest to abate sector. And that is because both processes and feedstock will need to be transitioned to net zero. In order to figure out how to get on this journey and how to make this possible, the Center of Global Commons, with support of Systemiq and financed by Mitsubishi Chemicals, has undertaken this one-year effort of actually studying of how chemicals can move to a net zero and chemicals positive future. And what we found was a huge challenge. Not only is the chemicals industry today aligned with a 4-degree pathway, it is a big industry that represents 4% of the global economy. And it is also present in virtually almost all manufactured goods, even our food. So with that, it also presents a huge scope 3 challenge that will not be solved for any of the downstream sectors if it is not solved for the chemicals industry as well. But besides a huge challenge, we also found a huge opportunity. We actually figured out that in 2050, the industry could not only be carbon neutral, it could actually become a carbon sink. It could each year abate 500 million tons of CO2. And that is a huge amount and therefore a huge opportunity for the industry and well beyond. So the question is how to get there. I think here at COP, there has historically been a focus on decarbonization, very much from a process and supply side perspective. And what we wanted to do in this report was not only to look at the supply and how to abate CO2 in the processes, but we also wanted to look at circularity and to really understand what role can the demand side play in making this net journey possible. And what we found is circularity plays a huge role. It makes the whole journey less risky. It makes it less costly. And it's also the most environmentally friendly way of getting to net zero. So tonight we will have the chance to hear about the report and listen to some of the findings. And we have the chance to also discuss and hear from a panel of experts where we have a very nice balance between academia, government and industry. And I very much also thank one of our participants that is online, Chet Holiday, but I will introduce all the speakers later as we move to the panel discussion. Now I would like to invite Daisuke Kanazawa to the stage. Thank you for being with us and thank you for presenting the report. Daisuke is a collaborative researcher at the Center for Global Commons at the University of Tokyo. He also brings over 30 years of experience in the chemicals industry. He's worked in business, in research and development, and in sustainability with Mitsubishi Chemicals in the US and in Japan. And of course, he conducted jointly with us the study and will now share the findings with us. So thank you very much and welcome.
So thank you very much, Sophie. So I'm going to talk about the findings from our report, which will be basically these. One moment, please. These are three items. But primarily, I'm going to be talking about how the chemical industry can decarbonize itself. But there is much more to it than simply decarbonizing the chemical industry itself. So let's take a dive into it. So first, why we wrote this report. We believe that on the left-hand side, the chemical industry is facing three uncertainties. First, uncertainty in the future demand of the net zero chemicals. If the future demand is uncertain, no one will be able to comfortably invest. The second is the uncertainty in technology. There are so many different technologies involved in the chemical industry: bio-based, direct air capture, DAC, recyclate, CCUS, hydrogen. So if you don't know what to invest in, you could invest in the wrong horse. So why don't we wait and see? That's, we believe, is taking place in Japan, or the chemical industry as a whole today. The third is the pathway uncertainty. No one has shown what it takes for the chemical industry to decarbonize up to scope 3. If you don't know what the goal is, it's really difficult to run at the as fast as you can. So these three uncertainties, we believe, are some of the factors slowing down the chemical industry's decarbonization. And we believe our report has shed light into these three uncertainties. And because of these three uncertainties and the challenges that are specific to the chemical industry that I'll be talking about in the next slide, chemical industry as a whole is lagging behind when it comes to the commitment to decarbonization against the industry average. And that's in spite of the fact that the chemical industry chemical products are used in most of the other sectors, which means that if the chemical industry cannot decarbonize itself, other sectors won't be able to decarbonize its scope 3 emissions. So that's why chemical industry's products, decarbonizing them will be so important. And let me talk about the decarbonization of the chemical industry, why it's so difficult. On the left-hand side, are the specific reasons or specific challenges the chemical industry has, which is the first one is the emissions upstream and downstream, meaning that the chemical industry's products contain carbon in itself, which means that the when the fossil feedstock is extracted, the emission needs to be taken care of. After the product usage, when it's incinerated, the emission needs to be taken care of. So that makes the chemical industry's decarbonization, scope 3 decarbonization, more difficult. That's number one. Number two is the complexity. The chemical industry's products are used in so wide variety of applications. So which means that in addition to plastics, it includes rubber, textile, detergent, pharmaceuticals, paint, and so on. So the chemical industry will need to work with many different customers or many different products to decarbonize. And that the other thing is the no silver bullet, meaning that with all these different technologies and products, there's no one single technology to decarbonize all of these. Chemical industry needs to work on many different technologies. Those are the three factors we believe are making the decarbonization of the chemical industry particularly difficult, in addition to what's in the left-hand side column, which makes the decarbonization of the heavy industries like steel and cement difficult. So that's why we believe the chemical industry could be the hardest to abate. As if these challenges are not enough, the chemical industry needs to work on scope 3 decarbonization in addition to scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 decarbonization is not the requirement from science only. but also requirements from business now, including the finance and the supply chain downstream. So that's the importance of the scope 3 decarbonization. But the decarbonization or the climate change is not the only challenge. We have all the other problems here that needs to be taken care of when we address the climate change issues. So those are the challenges the chemical industry have when it tries to decarbonize itself. And to provide the solution or the pathway to decarbonization, what we did is this. So we looked at the 8 primary or basic chemicals, which are on the left-hand side pie chart, that comprise 70% of the scope 3 emissions: ammonia, methanol, ethylene, and so on. So we look at these 8 chemicals and built a quantitative model to match the demand and the supply side. We built 3 different demand scenarios and the 5 different supply scenarios to combine. That will give 3 by 5, 15 different pathways to decarbonize. Of these 15, today we'll be looking at 2 only. 1 demand side scenario and 2 supply side scenario. The demand side scenario, will have a strong circular economy is in it. And the 2 supply side scenario, one is the cheapest way to decarbonize, and the other is the fastest way to decarbonize. So we'll have those scenarios presented. But before we go into that, Sophie will talk about the overall strategy to decarbonize and also the in-depth analysis on the demand side requirements. So Sophie, please.
Thank you very much. So how to transition the system? We built a model that looked at all scopes 1 to 3, and it looked at both the supply side and the demand side. So I think on the supply side, quite traditionally, we looked at the feedstocks, we looked at the processes and the energy source for these processes. And we also looked at what will be necessary in terms of capturing any residual emissions. But besides looking at the supply side, we also wanted to capture the demand side in this model. And here we very much looked at reduction of primary resource or primary inputs from chemicals through elimination, reduction, substitution, and recycling. So understanding how this can lower our demand up to 2050 if all the downstream industries apply, and we have looked at different levels of aggressivity of demand and circularity measures. And I would like to give you a little bit of the picture of what we found in this analysis. What we see here is that actually until 2050, we have a big increase, a huge increase in the need for chemicals, both in the ammonia chemical side, but also of the non-ammonia chemicals. And this on the supply side is driven by actually the need that we have for chemicals to support the transition of downstream industries. So this 5-fold increase in ammonia is very much due to, of course, rising population and the need for fertilizer, but much more it's driven by actually the decarbonization of the shipping industry. We see that ammonia will play a huge role here in this net zero pathway of this industry, and therefore actually will increase enormously by 2050. We see also an increase, particularly in methanol, on the non-ammonia chemical side. And this is very interesting because we see it as a technology that actually will be crucial to decarbonize olefins and aromatics. So also here we have a roughly three times increase in chemicals. Now that we will see later actually has a huge impact in terms of the investments that are needed to decarbonize this highly increased demand in chemicals. And here we can see on the non-ammonia chemical side what a huge role circularity and actually reducing demand plays. So we found that the demand of non-ammonia chemicals can actually be reduced by over 30%, by about 1/3 in 2050. And this is actually a reduction of 14% versus the demand today. And that, of course, hugely decreases the risks of other residual and very risky technologies that we find today, particularly carbon capture and storage. So I think with that, we will actually talk a little bit about the limitations that we find in terms of feedstock and in terms of the system's outputs.
Thank you, Sophie. So this is another slide that explains under scope 3 net zero, the supply will be limited. That's what the slide is trying to show. The arrow in the middle shows the demand of the chemical products. Of all the carbon embedded in the demand has to come from somewhere on the left-hand side. One of these sources, either bio and DAC, which means it has to come from the air, or it has to come from the recyclate, or it has to come from the fossil fuel. So one of these three. And after the usage of the products, it will have to go into one of the three boxes on the right-hand side as the end destination. It will have to be either incinerated into the air or recycled back to products or sequestered into the ground. And the under constraints of the scope 3 net zero, there are equations. And if we solve those equations, the outcome is that the amount of supply equals the total of the three blue boxes, all of which are limited in supply, which means that the under the scope 3 net zero, the amount of supply depends on the bio and DAC, recyclate, amount of bio and DAC, amount of recyclate, and amount of CCS. So the winning business strategy will be to secure access to these three scarce sources. And I'll refer back to this slide later on. So now moving on to the supply side. I said earlier that we have two supply scenarios. One is the the cheapest way to decarbonize, which is the most economic scenario, and the fastest pathway to decarbonize, which is the fastest abatement scenario. The cheapest scenario relies a lot on the fossil feedstock, 74%. So it still uses a lot of fossil feedstock plus CCS. On the other hand, the fastest abatement scenario relies a lot on the alternative carbon feedstock, which is the bio-based feedstock, DAC, direct air capture, and the recyclate. Both scenarios rely a lot on the green hydrogen, as well as the, and it uses a lot of energies to feed the green hydrogen. And the fastest abatement scenario, if you look at the right bottom corner, the emission in 2050 will be minus 0.3 gigaton, which means that the chemical industry scope 1, 2, 3 will be carbon negative, meaning that the entire chemical industry will be a carbon sink, while providing plastics or other chemical products to consumers as long as they use them in a sensible manner. Now, let me move on to the finance side. The right-hand side chart shows the cumulative capital expenditure from 2020 to 2050. The right-hand bar chart, 1.2 trillion, is the non-net zero scenario. So, but the two other bars, 2.7 and 3.2 trillions, are the net zero scenarios. So to get to net zero, it will cost twice or roughly 3 times as much, but in the same order of magnitude. But all of these net zero investments will lead to a higher unit cost. Unit cost means the dollar per kilogram of whatever chemicals. We estimate that the cost of basic chemicals will increase in 2050 by 50 to 100%. This is a huge increase, 50 to 100% increase of the basic chemical is a huge increase for those in this basic chemical industry. But when we apply a base standard economic analysis to find out how much this 100% increase in the chemical industry will transfer into the end user products, and we found that it's only about 1%. Chemical industry is not the chemical products is not the only source of the cost increase, but this 1% is much smaller than a lot of people would assume. So what this means is that the leaders in the chemical industry should not deterred by the seemingly large upfront investment or upfront cost increase of 100%, because the impact to the society is much smaller than that. So that's the left-hand side. That's about this side. Now, moving on to the carbon pricing. So the carbon pricing is there to bridge the cost gap between the net zero chemicals and the fossil counterparts. The left-hand side shows the positive carbon pricing, meaning that the cost of the net zero products, chemical products, are more expensive than the fossil counterparts. So the chemical industry does need carbon pricing to bridge the cost gap. But the problem is the diversity of the chemical products. As you can see, ammonia, BDX, methanol, and olefins all require different level of carbon pricing, meaning that there is no one-size-fits-all carbon pricing to cover or bridge the cost gap for all the chemical products. So that's one of the challenges. Moving on to the right-hand side, we expect the cost of the renewable energy or green hydrogen will drop very fast toward 2040 and 2050. So the required carbon pricing to bridge the cost gap in 2040, 2050 will be smaller than 2020 today. So this will require the carbon price to start higher and keep going down lower and lower. That's completely opposite from what we expect. We expect the carbon pricing to start lower and gradually grow higher. What this means is that it's unlikely for the chemical industry to get enough carbon pricing in 2020, because what we have in 2020 would be too large for carbon pricing for everyone. So what this all means is the leaders in the chemical industry will have to take risk in investing in net zero chemicals, in spite of the imperfect carbon pricing environment. Imperfect meaning that the carbon pricing alone will not be able to bridge the 100% of the cost gap. So that's what the analysis tells us. Moving on to the recommendations, we have 3 areas of recommendations. One is at the governance level, and I'll be focusing on the First Movers Coalition, number 1. And the operational recommendations, I'll have one slide right after this to talk about this. And the enablers. Enablers including the digitizing the information across the supply chain, as well as accelerating the investment in the technology, and also having a dialogue with the financial community about where the chemical industry is heading. So let me move on to the operational transformation, or the which is the expanded role of the chemical industry. So left-hand side is today's chemical industry's value chain, and the right-hand side is 2050. So today, chemical industry buys oil and gas and turns that into plastic, rubber, textile, detergent, and so on. Those products are used by consumers and goes into the waste management process. Most are either incinerated or landfill today. If you remember the 6 boxes with the arrow in between, the conclusion from that slide was that the chemical industry needs to secure access to bio and direct capture, recyclates, and CCS, which means that the chemical industry needs to go upstream and downstream to secure the access to the alternative carbon and renewable energy upstream, as well as downstream to secure access to recyclates and CCS. So that's what this chart is telling us. So the winning strategy, business strategy for the chemical industry is to take risk, not wait for the perfect carbon pricing, invest in expanding the capacity of the net zero chemical production and secure access to the resources that I talked earlier. The losing business strategies, on the other hand, will be to wait for the perfect carbon pricing. But to implement the winning strategy, obviously the increased cost is going to be a big issue. The high cost of net zero chemicals will lead to a smaller volume of demand. Smaller volume of demand will again lead to a higher cost. So it's a chicken and egg cycle. Higher cost, smaller volume, higher cost. So how can we get out of this chicken and egg cycle? We believe one solution is the First Movers Coalition, which has already started in the other industries such as steel and cement. First Movers Coalition, the demand side, basically the manufacturing of the end user products such as automotive or textile or packaging in the chemicals case, will agree to buy certain amount of net zero chemicals in 2030 or 2040. And responding to that, the supply side, the chemical industry, will agree to competitively fill those demands. Of course, the number of conditions will need to be met, as shown on the right-hand side. This First Movers Coalition, we believe, is one way forward to break out of the chicken and egg cycle that I mentioned earlier. So with this, let us finish the presentation side and move on to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daisuke, for giving us the overview of the report. We would love to and want to give you the chance to actually ask questions on what you've heard now. We first want to invite the panelists and have the panel discussions along some of the key questions and findings of the report. And so if you could hold your questions until the end of the panel discussion, that would be great. Those that are online, please do feel free to already put your questions into the chat so that we can take them up as we have finished the panel discussion. So in the panel discussion, we want to go through some of the key topics and sections of the report. We want to discuss the supply and how to decarbonize the processes and the feedstock. We want to talk about value chain collaboration. Thank you. And we wanted to talk about the role of circularity and actually demand management. Before we talk about the green premium and the investment needs and how to handle that green premium within the industry and more importantly within the value chain. And then finally, we also want to give an outlook on the geopolitical situation that we find that is very much influencing the raw materials today that are needed for the transition, but also that are being actually used today, and how to balance that versus national protectionism. So I would like to invite the panelists to the discussion. First, I want to introduce to you Chad Holliday, who is online with us. Thank you very much. He is co-chair of the Mission Possible Partnership, that is an alliance of climate leaders of the highest emitting industries that have the goal to decarbonize across the value chain. He's also the former CEO of DuPont, so we very much look forward to the industry perspective that he can bring to this discussion. Now here in the Japanese pavilion, I want to first invite Shinichi Kihira to the stage. Please join us here. He is the Deputy Director General for Technology and Environment at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. And with that, we'll bring the perspective of government and public sector to the discussion. Second, I would like to invite Lord Adair Turner to the stage. Adair Turner is the chair of the Energy Transitions Commission, which is a global coalition that is both industry, companies, and NGOs And he will bring the analytic view of critical inputs to the chemicals transition. So a view to the needed inputs in terms of renewable energy and hydrogen, and the geopolitical situation that we are finding as we are entering the transition now. Then I would like to invite Naoko Ishii to the stage. Naoko is the director of the Center for Global Commons at the University of Tokyo. And for everyone to be aware, that center was established to catalyze system change so that humans can live and actually sustain development within the planetary boundaries. So Naoko will help us to basically keep that perspective and make sure we keep committed to that goal beyond also decarbonization. Then I would finally, last but not least, like to invite Paul Pullman to the stage. Paul is a business leader, campaigner, and co-author of Net Positive. He works to accelerate action by business to tackle climate change as well as inequality, and for business to be a force for good. As former CEO of Unilever, I think he has proven and made the point that actually profit through purpose is a viable business strategy. So he will bring that perspective to the panel. So with that, welcome and thank you all. So please all feel free to share the microphones that you have in front of you as we're discussing. You need to turn them on before speaking. We want to start with the question of defossilization of supply. And my first question would actually go to Chad Holliday, who is online, for us to set the stage and to understand how the urgency of making the transition is perceived by the industry today. And secondly, also, what are some of the barriers that the industry sees in actually moving ahead with the transition? So over to you, Chad.
Thank you very much. And my compliments to the organizations that put this on. That's an excellent presentation. I think summarized it quite well. I've got some good news for you. I only see 3 steps we have to do to accomplish what's been described today. And we're making really good progress on the first step. The first step is reports like this one, reports that have come before it. Laura Turner is there, the Energy Transition Commission that did some of the first work on showing that there was a route for the chemical industry to make this major transformation. So I'm quite encouraged the concepts are being proven. The next 2 steps are a bit more challenging. The next one is to demonstrate these processes not in a computer model, but in the real world. And from all my 30 plus years in industry, you have to prototype, you have to demonstrate commercial scale, you have to do that again, and you got to have a customer for it, as Paul knows quite well, to make this system work. And I'm really glad the report flagged that out. And then when we demonstrate this technology, the third step is governments will have to step in, as your report has said, and set some processes in place to be sure that we have carbon pricing or some other process to make it work. I'd like to share with you 2 reasons why I believe the industry is ready to this in addressing your question. First, if you go back to 1985, and I know that sounds like ancient history, but in Canada, the concern of the chemical industry about viability because of explosions, because of safety, because of environmental impact was great. And so a concept was created called responsible care. The industry did it on their own to say we must perform differently or we will not have the right to operate. Today, that's in 67 countries. 90% of the global chemicals are produced by a company that assigns to this responsible care criteria. And includes 96 of the 100 largest companies in the world in the chemical companies. So the industry has shown its ability to come together without government forcing it and really learn from each other to make steps forward. We can build on that foundation to take these steps. Second, if you go back to my 3 steps, the second step is demonstrate the technology. We have had an experience with this before where a part of the industry that made CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, came together to find a replacement for that and demonstrate that technology on their own. Then when that was in place, governments could do my step 3, what's called the Montreal Protocol, and put the regulation in place to make it work. The industry would love the regulation first, but it's probably not going to happen. We're going to need to be sure to demonstrate it first. And I believe that's a good summary of where we are right now.
Thank you, Ted. You talked about demonstrating scale and the role of policy, which brings me to my second question, which is about collaboration, because I think without collaboration, we cannot reach that scale. So the question is how to get the actors in the value chain to collaborate, and how to reduce, importantly, scope 3, which is actually the largest part of the chemicals industry's emissions. So I would love to invite Paul here on the stage to comment on how to achieve this value chain collaboration.
Yeah, it works. So the first thing I wanted to start with is that there is an imperative for change. And that is probably the first reason why we want to sit together, because the task that we have in front of us is clearly not easy for any individual company to do alone. If that were the case, the issue would have been solved already. So this industry is on a trajectory of 4 degrees by itself, well above the 2.5 degrees or 2.6 degrees that the world is projecting. So there is a case of you have to be part of what the global world is deciding to go to. We're sitting here at Glasgow, in Sharm el-Sheikh, coming out of Glasgow, where we have made the clear commitment for 1.5 degrees. So that's a burning platform. The second reason why you want to work together is not only is the signal given where we want to go, increasingly we see that the companies that stay behind are becoming the losers. The companies that move forward are becoming the winners. So you want to be part of the moving forward coalition, not the moving back coalition. And the third thing is very simply, it's the signals from the marketplace. The marketplace for this value chain might be companies like Unilever or Nestle or P&G, it doesn't matter. But these signals are coming from the consumers, from the Gen Zs or the millennials that don't buy your products otherwise, from the innovations that the end consumer is looking for. So you want to position yourself well for the future. Now, what is very exciting about this, what you are proposing in the chemical industry, I nearly call it a little bit the hidden industry, because it's so far removed from anybody that we nearly forget about it. But increasingly, companies are making these scope 3 agreements that you refer to. And not only are they making the scope 3 agreements, the companies like the Walmarts or the Nestle's or the Salesforces, they're increasingly saying you can only be a supplier in my value chain if you actually deliver on these scope 3. I want to help you. So it's not that it's not my responsibility. I want to help you because I know you can't do it alone, but you better do it, otherwise you're not my supplier anymore. So frankly, we can sit here and debate it theoretically, but the train has left the station. You frankly don't have a choice if you want to stay in business. And I would argue also, it is actually cheaper to move that direction now than not. This is actually one of the exciting industries. And I grew up in the chemical industry. You know, my whole life I've sold detergents and cleaning products. That's all chemicals. So I love the industry because it has a great purpose. But I haven't seen such an exciting report come out from Systemiq and obviously with your work on the Commons Institute and Tokyo University, etc. A report that says we can be carbon negative by 2040. What I actually like is we can be carbon positive by 2050. We can do that while at the same time we have a higher profit pool in the total industry, and we're also creating more jobs. It hits all the different elements of what you would call success. But it is very clear that in order to make that major transformation, that we need to work with all the different partners in the value chain, including, by the way, the financial community, including the ultimate customers up and down the value chain. And this is what the report points out very well. So then you come, and I apologize for, and I'll stop here, but then you come to the essence of your question, what is needed? I think we have the technology, at least what I understand, more or less. I think we have the financing to do this. We have the economic rationale to make it possible. So the real thing that we now need is the leadership. This has become a human issue of willpower and leadership. Are we willing to take responsibility for our total footprint in society? Are we willing to set real targets that science requires us to make, not targets we can get away with? Are we willing to work with others in partnership and find these common outcomes that are better for all of us instead of all losing? And that requires courage, that requires leadership. And this is probably the most important ingredient that I know is present in the industry, but we now need to collectively muster that.
Great, thank you, Paul. What I hear is the pressure is trickling through from the consumer to the FMCGs, for example, to the upper end of the value chain. And there is a need to understand that there is actually value being created through this process. And acknowledging that takes a lot of courage. I would also like to invite Naoko to comment on this question, please, because I do think that this collaboration is very much at the heart of, we know how it can work, but we need to make it work. So I would like to actually invite a couple of panelists.
All things I wanted to say so well stated by Paul. So, but that is exactly the reason why the Center for Global Commons, together with Ms. Chemical and Systemiq, actually started to think about this report. As Paul said, chemical industry is hiding in a sense, and also considered to be one of the most difficult, the hard-to-abate sector, and for many, many reasons already mentioned. But then if we were able to decarbonize ourselves, we could actually help not only ourselves, but the entire economic sector, because chemical permeates every part of our economic life and actually social life. So that is a very good reason. We have a very good reason to try it, and that the chemical become from a bad guy and to drag everybody's feet towards that the kind of saving the entire economic system. That was the intention, that why we wanted to try this report and present that the needed to for the chemical to become a, to change its nature. And as also mentioned by Paul, that we are trying to actually present a global charter for the transition of the chemical industry. It's not even chemical industry, it's a chemical system, because it's not only chemical industry in the narrow sense. We are trying to bring everybody along the value chain together as a chemical system. We need that in a global charter to bring everybody, and not only industry, but the consumer, the producer, the financial system together to really aim at this big picture. And so it's need, and we need this mindset change. We need a leadership, how to bring everybody together towards the one direction. And we need to really do it simultaneously, because otherwise we can't really flip the system. And that's so critical. And so this is, we have a very ambitious goal. I hope that we need to do it. It's imperative, and hope that by bringing everybody together, I think that we can achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Naoko. Thank you for bringing that systems view. I think that's very, very key to the collaboration. Shinichi, I would like to move to the circularity aspect, and how can we accelerate actually the movement on that side? And also, I would like to ask, of course, you have the perspective of Japan, but given this COP also, how can we accelerate also in emerging economies, where it's often challenging to fast track the development actually of a lot of infrastructure that will be needed in order to make the transition?
Yes, thank you for your question. And first of all, thank you for this opportunity to participate in this seminar. I'd like to thank the Tokyo University Center for Global Commons and also the Mitsubishi Chemical for these. And coming to your question, how can we facilitate this transition? As everybody said, the decarbonization of the chemical industry is particularly very challenging due to the complexity throughout the manufacturing process and also the variety of products. But I would say recognize two important points to facilitate the transition. First, it's about technology innovation, of course, and so Japan, we have launched the 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund, and we focus on long period, not only R&D stage, but demonstration stage and also social implementation stage. So the fund can support 10 years duration and with the commitment of the company. So, and now we have already allocated 80% of our 3 trillion yen to different projects. And out of that, in the chemical sector, we are involved in the 3 technology area of the R&D. One is switching the heat source from fossil fuel-based to clean fuel-based, like ammonia heat source. Second is enhancing circularity using the chemical recycling technology. And third is switching feedstock from fossil fuel based to hydrogen based or biomass based. So the first champion of these technology innovation will have the best opportunity. So we as a government is supporting heavily these innovation race happening. Second is about the finance side, the transition finance. The challenge for the decarbonization of these hard-to-abate industry like chemical is we don't have the zero emission opportunity today. The reasons are technology yet to be developed or still very costly. So the industry cannot leapfrog today, but then they normally faces divestment from banks or investors because they're not clean today. But that is a problem. What is strongly needed is a financial mechanism that support their steady efforts for transition. So we are establishing the transition finance mechanism. We make sure the finance resource go and support that transition. So we built the basic guideline, and we also released 7 sector by sector roadmap, including chemical, showing that the best science shows a trajectory how to reach the carbon neutral by 2050. And we also support several 12 model cases of the transition bonds and loans, and already $2.5 billion projects, 12 projects are already financed using our support mechanism. So all these innovation and also working on finance is also very important from our view.
Thank you, Shinichi, for bringing the topic of transition finance. For sure, all these investments are very key. I would also like to talk a little bit about the green premium that we saw in the presentation and the question of how will this cost actually be distributed in the value chain. And Chad, I would very much like to hear your opinion how the upstream chemicals industry can deal with this premium that we see at the end of the value chain is not that large. It's roughly 1% to a max of 3% when it comes to the end product, but it will need to be borne throughout the value chain. And so how can the upstream chemicals industry deal with this green premium?
I think your question is great. And you talked about first movers. So what we need is first movers to sign a contract that will share the cost of that. We need really clear action around it. A first movers coalition is great, but it only counts when you actually have signed a contract and I'll buy this much from you. So I think we're at a critical time right here where we have to take these first steps to get us moving. You know, what your report has said is a fantastic vision of where we have to be. We know where we are, but these first steps are important. So if we could get some first movers to sign contracts now for green chemicals, as soon as they're available with a reasonable premium where it's shared between the producer, I'm confident we can have a company step up to do that. But if I could enter from all the companies I'm working with today through the Mission Possible Partnership, there's one common problem that always comes up: the length of time to get approvals to build these new plants. It's just taking too long. If you want to do an offshore windmill, which is very safe in the US, 5 years to get approval. That's ridiculous. So governments could come together without costing a penny and just look at how do we speed up that process without skipping any key steps. And that would be a real step toward that customer then having that contract and making it work.
Thank you, Chad. I would, again, I think it's a very important question. I would like to extend it to the group here to ask who should pay for the green premium. And also, I would like to bring in the topic of carbon pricing. And Adair, I would like your view on this. What role can this play in order to transition?
Well, obviously, those two issues are very closely linked. So in the presentation, we saw two interesting things about the cost of achieving net zero, or cost of the zero carbon ways of producing. The first is that the cost per ton of carbon saved varies significantly by the different chemicals and was much lower, for instance, for the ammonia route, the ammonia category, than for the non-ammonia. And then there was some distinctions within that. I think it was $35 a ton for ammonia and over 100 for some of the non-ammonia. It was also pointed out that maybe difficult to understand at first, that the required carbon price to bridge the green premium in the short term would be quite high, and then it would come down over time, though it's actually quite, clear what that means. It's when you get technological progress, it means that the cost of the green premium declines over time. Now, I don't think we should conclude from that there isn't a role for a generalized cross-economy or cross-sector carbon price, or even that it would be wrong for it to rise over time. Because always remember, if you have a low cost of abatement, say $10 a ton, and you're applying $100 a ton carbon price, it doesn't matter, because those guys will have abated and they won't be paying the carbon price. We shouldn't be worried by that. And so there is a clear role, and we must not lose sight of this across the economy to have the sort of cross-economy carbon price that the EU ETS delivers. And of course, that is getting to serious levels, $80, 80 euros, $100 around at the moment. And I don't think we should give up on the idea of encouraging as many countries as possible could go down the route of having, quite widespread carbon prices. But of course, the issue, which was rightly raised, well, what if we don't have that? What if we don't manage to persuade it? What are our other routes to cover the green premium? And we've been talking about some of these, and they fundamentally come back to things like the First Movers Coalition, and whether somebody further downstream is willing to pay that price, and whether you can then hand that price on to the end consumer. And again, I think it's interesting to think about the difference between some of the ammonia routes and the non-ammonia routes. So you mentioned that one of the major areas of growth of ammonia demand will be in green shipping. And indeed, if you look at how much the extra cost of ammonia could add to the extra cost of shipping, it really is quite significant, because it's not just the cost of producing the ammonia in a green fashion, not a non-green fashion, it's the cost of using ammonia rather than heavy fuel oil. And I think that could certainly add 50 to 100% to freight rates. Now, in terms of the analysis you've presented, that's not a problem. What does an extra 100% on a freight rate do to the cost of a pair of jeans bought in London and made in Bangladesh? It's so minute you won't notice it, but it is a problem for the individual shipping company, which makes the commitment to use an ammonia fuel rate. So the question is, can they make agreements with some of their major customers, with, say, the Walmarts of the world, the IKEAs of the world, that they will accept higher freight rates than is generally applicable. And I think the answer is yes, that can help drive the first mover stuff. But in shipping, remember, this is a very diverse industry. A lot of shipping goes through broker markets. It's not always long-term big company to big company relationships. There are things continually changing. So I think the answer is yes, there's a role for those first movers, those companies which are willing to accept the green premium, but we will eventually have to add either carbon pricing or regulation. And the great news in the shipping industry is that unlike in most other sectors of the economy, we actually have an international regulator which could impose regulation or a global carbon price. And that is the International Maritime Organization that has already driven major changes in other aspects of environmental regulation. Then you switch to the non-ammonia side, the plastic side. Clearly that has a hell of a lot to do with what Paul was talking about earlier, that coordination, collaboration through the value chain. And here, in a sense, almost we have it a bit easier, or I think we can go further down the first mover coalition route or the voluntary route, because quite a lot of those plastics are going either into the automotive industry or into the consumer goods industry. And those are ones which then are selling a consumer product where somebody wants to be able to promise to the buyer of that car, or to the buyer of that packaged goods, this has been made in a zero carbon fashion. So my gut feel is that on the plastic side, the first mover approach, the buyer approach might have more mileage to take us further than the shipping route, where I think it will have to be a contribution, but we will need to progress quickly to carbon prices and regulation to make a difference. So I think if you think about the difference between buyers willing voluntarily to pay the premium, or simply placing supply chain pressure on you saying you better do it whether you like it or not, I think that will be more of what we see on automotive and on consumer packaged goods. I think it'll play a role in shipping, but probably less of a proportionate role. And we could also think about how will it work in the fertilizer market as well, which is the other big area for ammonia.
Thank you, Adair, for this balanced perspective. So here we don't necessarily need to differentiate the carbon price as much, but we should look where we need regulation and where we can go actually with a mechanism like the first mover coalition, which is very much something we want to encourage through this report. I would also like to hear your view, Naoko, on this question of the green premium and of the role of carbon pricing as you see it.
Well, so well said now by Adele. Adele, I didn't know that you are such an economist. Economist. Because you know, this classification, that the framing is so beautiful. If the world is more like an academic world, that if we were able to impose a carbon tax, that then or carbon pricing, you know, across the world, across the industry, the things would have been solved. And we don't necessarily have to struggle of those kind of regulation, the sector by sector approach. But unfortunately, as of today, we can't really expect that this universal, that the carbon pricing will be imposed across industry, across countries. So that's why we need to think a little bit by sector, or that the industry by industry. And with that, I think that first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that there are different ways of addressing that issue, as already mentioned. And so sometimes that the regulation works better than pricing. Sometimes we need to really deploy that the buyer's pressure, that the consumer pressure, the investment pressure, quite depending on that how to analyze that the pressure point of that along that value chain. So that's maybe one point. But I think at the end of the day, also being an economist, I think it's important to recognize that we need to make an economic case that either through regulation or either through taxation or either to create the market pressure without creating economic case that we can't really address that issue. So that and at the end of the day, I think the world we really want to aim at in 2050 within the planetary boundaries, we should have this kind of mechanism that we don't necessarily have to argue or worried about who is paying that the green premium. It has to be really dealt into either in the financial system or the regulation or actually the marketplace, like some of the policies like EPR, which is another way to address that kind of creating that more fair system to create an economic incentive. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Naoko. Shinichi, as Director General in the Ministry of the Economy and Trade, I do have to also include you in this question and would love to get your views as well.
Yes, thank you very much. First on the First Movers Coalition, this demand pull type of measure and tool, this is very powerful and useful, I think. So that's why Japan is now the strategic board member of the First Movers Coalition, and we facilitate a similar approach. In Japan, we do this GX League framework, and we now have over 500 companies join this league, covering more than 40% of CO2 emission of Japan, which is equivalent to EU ETS. So we are also taking this similar approach of this demand pull type. And talking about the carbon pricing, the effectiveness of carbon price is different among sectors. It depends on whether you have the technology option today or not. That's one thing. And another is whether the product is heavily traded product or not. That's the second point. So in case of chemical, if there's a technological option existing, then the carbon price will reallocate the resource and move the resource to the best technology. However, chemical industry is still working on the decarbonized technology. So carbon price may not be the perfect tool yet. Then finally, I'd like to come to, let me be a little bit provocative, and I would like to propose this new idea of avoided emission. We think chemical industry or several other manufacturing industry, the real green value is not valued yet, because chemical industry, of course, reducing the greenhouse gas emission of your own supply chain is very important, but the real value chemical industry is providing is replacing. Otherwise, the end product can be very heavy or not durable, but chemical industry is providing this lightweight, strong, durable material to the end use industry, automobile or other products. So this is the avoided emission which the product has realized. And the existing greenhouse gas protocol, the scope 1, 2, 3, do not capture this. Good example is heat pump air conditioner. It's very popular now in Europe market. They are replacing gas heating system and realizing enormous amount of CO2 reduction in Europe. But the heat pump air conditioner manufacturer, the more they produce, the more they are measured as a CO2 emitters. And that huge reduction happening in the European market is not counted in their greenhouse gas protocol. So what is missing is, let's count that avoided emission that actually reduced, and that is more closer to the real value of this heat pump. So what we are now working is to try to set up a new evaluation methodology to measure this kind of avoided emission. And it can apply, of course, to chemical industry, but also any industry. And the discussion is already widespreading among the industry, and leading figure is the World Business, the WBCSD, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. So they are almost ready to issue their guideline on this avoided emission, a completely new concept. So Monday, you guys are invited to another session in this pavilion. Monday, starting at 5 o'clock, we have this session on avoided emission together with WBCSD, and also inviting the various industry, global industry, and also UAE as a next COP presidency, also India as a next G20 presidency. All of us are very strong on industrial decarbonization agenda. So Japan as a next G7 presidency, we will try to put this high on our agenda. So just one last proposal coming from myself about this avoided emission.
Thank you, Shinichi. I think two things. Yes, you would like to comment on that? Please go ahead, Lydia.
Can I just add one thing about carbon pricing, though, which is one has to realize that, and it is the great power of carbon pricing, that it spreads throughout the economy and has a benefits in many different forms. So even if it is the case that at the moment, in the actual supply side of chemicals, that a carbon price wouldn't necessarily immediately produce a switching because the technologies are not there, a higher price of plastics will create incentives for the packaged goods industry to work out how to use less plastics, or would immediately produce an increase in recycling because you've increased the value of the recyclate relative to the fossil fuels. So it may be that initially our biggest impact of carbon prices, where we do apply them, is in the circularity agenda and the reduced demand agenda, but that's fine because we need that vehicle of reduced emissions as well as the supply side. And it may be that later it starts to incent the switch to some of the things like methanol to olefins, methanol to aromatics, which in the report are part of the supply side decarbonization.
That's music to my ears, Adair. I love to hear how we are being pushed, not only might come later, the actually validity of investments, but actually also in the reduction side, which we argue is so fundamental in the transition. Paul, I saw you wanted to also jump in there.
No, I like it. I wish I would have worked at Unilever with Adair because it would have given me a lot of ideas to do even better. But you know, I have a slogan in life that says it's better to make the dust than eat the dust. And most of the decisions that come to a CEO are decisions because there are trade-offs to be made. I've never had a decision that I had to make where people said, hey, it's better and cheaper. I want your approval to do it. So most of the things that come to you deal with, are we willing to pay the cost now because it's cheaper tomorrow? Unilever would have never transferred out of fossil and to go to green energy, which now gives us tremendous advantages, if we wouldn't have said we're willing to make this upfront investments because it puts us into a competitive advantage. We would have never moved to sustainable palm oil if we were not willing to pay for the first certificates that we created in the sustainable certificates in the market. We would not have moved out of plastic to paper packaging and other things which the consumer are now looking for, if we would not have been willing to make these initial investments. That's why you're a CEO. A CEO makes decisions to build a factory before the factory is full, to invest in people before they become CEOs. Why shouldn't they make a decision to invest in the future of mankind? I actually feel even silly to have to explain that here. So the first point is better to make the dust than eat the dust, also in this industry. The second one, which is equally important, is actually, if you look at the First Mover Coalition, it's $12 billion of purchasing has been put already on the table, $8 trillion of value of companies that are represented. And if what is very clear, what we have to create here in the chemical industry as well, is a little bit the FOMO. If I'm not part of this coalition, I'm worse off, even if it costs me slightly money. And the best way to make these coalitions work is to start with a few things that immediately create success. When we created the Fashion Pact, also with Systemiq, or the Food Coalition, or now with tourist and travel or the urban environment, we look at things that give you immediate benefit on the short-term basis. We have the biggest green energy buying coalition in fashion that has ever been created there. The companies were too small to do it by themselves. We aggregated, we bought for them green energy. All the ones that are participating are having energy at lower cost. So you join the coalition because of fear of missing out is an incredible factor. And my final comment I want to make is, it's not all easy, as Chad said as well. And there are some barriers that require governments, that require sometimes multiple governments, etc. But there are very few businesses that are taking the time and effort at CEO level to go together to these governments and help them make it possible. It is very easy to say they need to do this or they need to do that, but they doesn't exist in our lives anymore. It's all of us. And it's difficult to be a politician at this moment. It's difficult to be in government. And if we don't step up and help them de-risk that political process and become stronger advocates of these broader systems changes or framework changes that we need, then we will not ultimately get there. That's our responsibility in the private sector to do that. So these are the three things, the way I look at it. And frankly, I have not been disappointed. And if there is a thing that is way out of whack, then obviously smart people don't do it. They wait for technology to come or do other things. But study after study shows that 80% of the issues that we're talking here today and in many other industry transformations can be done with the simple willpower of wanting to do it.
Right. So the value is there. It takes the vision and the courage to see it and grasp it. And there is also some of the fear of missing out by creating that joint movement for those that need that encouragement. Now, all of that, of course, is not happening. I want to give time to the audience here in the pavilion as well as online to also ask questions. But I do have a last question for you, Adair, because everything that we heard is not happening in a vacuum. We have a moment of geopolitical tension, and I would like to understand from you, what role does this play in this transition that we've been discussing? And second, since we're also here at a COP in Africa, I would also like to hear from you, what is the opportunity that you see, or a specific role that also Africa can play in this transition?
Well, I'm not sure that the immediate crisis produced by the Ukraine war and the increase of energy has a huge impact on this particular debate, except in one way, that it has made people look at the price of gas, methane, realize how volatile it is, and therefore reinforce something which is happening in any case, which I think is a really, really big change in the nature of our energy system, which is the realization of the possibility of green hydrogen. I think hydrogen in general and green hydrogen in particular is a really fundamental change which is occurring in the energy system and which does have long-term, geopolitical implications, because it has implications for the future nature of the energy system and where energy is cheaply produced. The most dramatic illustration of this is in the IEA's report on Africa, which came out earlier this year. And they have one extraordinary chart in it, which says that they have worked out that the African continent could produce within 200 kilometers of the coast, so that it is easy to ship, 5,000 million tons of green hydrogen at a cost which will eventually be less than $2 a kilogram. Now at $2, and with quite a lot of it, but still lower than that. At those prices, green hydrogen becomes immensely economic in lots of different sectors of the economy, and 5,000 million tons is huge. The world consumes at the moment 100 million tons of hydrogen of all sorts, primarily gray hydrogen from methane. At the Energy Transition Commission, we are real bulls on hydrogen, and we think it could go to 500 to 800 million tons, going into ammonia for the shipping system, going into the chemical system for the MTO, MTA type routes for chemicals, going into aviation fuels, etc. So Africa itself could produce 10 times or 6 to 10 times even our very high level of assumptions and could do it cheaply. And the reason why I want to say that is this really begins to change the logical location of where you do certain value-added functions. In the steel, iron and steel sector, it is raising real questions about where the logical place in the world is to turn iron ore into iron. That is done, for instance, in the Ruhr Valley in Germany. It is done in the Ruhr Valley in Germany because that's where the coking coal was when this industry developed in the 1890s. But when you start producing sponge iron from direct a reduction of iron using hydrogen, you wouldn't necessarily place it there. You'd place it where hydrogen and production, green hydrogen, is cheapest. And where this comes into this industry is, I think, very obviously in one sector, and then maybe in the other sector. I think it is definitely relevant in the ammonia sector. So what are Namibia, Morocco, Mauritania, countries which have abundant cheap wind and solar, cheap renewable energy, and therefore cheap green hydrogen currently thinking about? They are thinking about, do I just produce the green hydrogen and ship it elsewhere in the world? Or do I produce the green ammonia? And do I just produce the green ammonia, or do I produce the green fertilizer with the ammonia? Very interesting. In Africa, sub-Saharan Africa today, the use of fertilizer is minute. It will have to increase. Most fertilizer into sub-Saharan Africa is imported. But if sub-Saharan Africa is one of the cheapest places in the world to produce green hydrogen, should it be in the future doing its own fertilizer production from its own green hydrogen? Now, of course, if it's a urea fertilizer rather than a nitrate fertilizer, you've got to get a carbon atom as well. So you've got to get that carbon atom either from CO2 capture, maybe from DAC in future, or a biofeedstock. And that, of course, is also true, and you made the point earlier, when we go over to what's been called the petrochemical side, the non-ammonia side, the characteristic of that is that you need a carbon atom as well. So it's less obvious that Africa, simply because it's got green hydrogen, becomes the location of where you do the olefins and the aromatics and the chemicals. And my gut feel is that the location of that may end up being stickier than the production of ammonia, where I think we could see very significant movements in where is the optimal place in the world to produce ammonia or ammonia-derived products. And this is part of an overall picture of a new picture of international trade. But for Africa, it does have major opportunities for a major new source of export revenues.
So we might see the shift of whole value chains on the long run. It has been a very excited discussion. I really appreciate all the passion that you have brought all as panelists to the discussion. And I would invite the audience actually to leverage that passion for the topic with questions. Yes, please. The first one here in the audience.
You've kindly shared with us the Japanese experience, the fund, the roadmaps applied. Can this roadmaps created can be applied to the developing countries? Is it generic enough to be applied everywhere? That's it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. You asked a question about this transition finance roadmap can be applied beyond Japan, and the answer is yes. That is exactly what we are working on today. this transition finance applies good to hard-to-abate sector, of course, but also it applies to, in Japan's case, we're doing a lot on supporting energy transition in Asian region. And we are we're creating this Asian Transition Finance Study Group, gathering ASEAN countries and building the Asian version of transition finance guidance. And we are supporting each Asian country to build their roadmap of transition. With all these tools, I think this concept of supporting the transition, we can provide this powerful tool and support all the developing countries or emerging countries to really make their transition without facing the divestment. Thank you.
Thank you, Shinichi. I think Adair, did you also want to comment? You, perfect. I think we have time for one more question. Also online, we would see your questions in the chat. Feel free. And also, if you have questions on the presentation that we've seen, now is the moment to ask the panelists or anything on the report.
We're just waiting for people to be stimulated. I just wanted to add one other question in relation to your, so developing economies, I'd mentioned Africa, but there are other middle-income developing countries where I think there could be major changes. It was interesting, I was earlier today with Mr. Arun Sharma, who is the major sustainability advisor to the Adani Group, and he is arguing that India is going to become a complete hub for green hydrogen. And that is, for instance, being pushed very strongly also by the other, the two biggest groups in India are the Adani Group and the Reliance Group, Mr. Adani and Mukesh Ambani of Reliance. Reliance is a big petrochemical player, and it is developing green hydrogen at a rapid pace to put into the chemicals complex. And Mr. Sharma was arguing that the world should watch out for India emerging as a major green hydrogen hub and in the use of it. So I think all of these ideas, that they are relevant across different sets of the developing economies. And of course, it is a range. I mean, India is sort of halfway between the developed world and the situation in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of the level of the development which it's already at. So we sometimes use this sort of binary developed and developing, but it's a very simplistic way of a very complex reality.
Thank you. We have another question here in the audience.
Thank you very much. So my name is Onte. I'm come from Indonesia. I'm the Vice Chairman of Indonesian Chambers of Commerce. And I want to share what we try to do in Indonesian Chambers of Commerce. Maybe related to this discussion. First, we have a net zero hub in Indonesia. In B20, we will pledge 100 companies in Indonesia being a net zero. This is the full commitment of the new chairman of Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, Pak Arsad Rashid. And why we built this hub? Because we want to facilitate our members in Indonesia who being net zero. At this point, of course, we really need your expertise to share technology, share system and everything to do this. But this is the first net zero hub, because talking with net zero hub, we're talking from now to the futures. And how about the emission already there now? In Indonesian Chambers of Commerce, we also built the second hub. We call it Regenerative Businesses Hub. Regenerative Business Hub in forestry, in agriculture, and others. We try to zinc our emission. And at this point, also, I think we need expertise. We need you all and maybe market, because with regenerative system, we will combine the agroforestry. Indonesian have, our members have more than 30 million hectares under concession. And this concession we want to transform being agroforestry, environmental services, and we try combine timber with cocoa, timber with coffee, timber with vanilla, with the regenerative way. Of course, I hear about the fast mover company in the downstream. Can we make like fast mover company in upstream also? Because we plan and we don't know. There are somebody will pay for this kind because we do the regenerative. But I do agree with Paul. We plan because we believe. We make a investment, full investment on that because we believe. And then this is the collaboration we very hope, yeah, the collaboration. I think we can, maybe you guys come to G20 or B20, maybe we can continue the conversation, but this is like introduction from Indonesian Chambers of Commerce. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I love that point of regeneration hubs. We are over time now. I don't know if there is a last reaction from anyone to that, or if we leave it with that inspiration that we got and continue the discussion indeed at the G20. I know several here will be there for that as well.
Just want to say I'm so inspired by your idea of the regeneration hub, because they kind of, the conversation still very much focused on the emission and the carbon, counting carbon, and not necessarily valuing the natural capital. So to me, the challenge is how this current economic system is able to incorporate the real value of the natural capital. Then we are able to achieve that the sustainable development within the planetary boundaries. So I very much wanted to visit you and to share our experience and to really work together to achieve this net zero, real net zero within the planetary boundaries. So thank you so much for the inspiration.
Thank you. With that, I will close, but as said, we want to continue this conversation on the First Mover Coalition, but also upstream and downstream. So please do get in touch, also those that were online. Thank you for participating. Thank you very much to Chad Holiday, who joined us online. It's never an easy position when there is a live panel, but it was so invaluable to have your view. So thank you so much. And thank you again to all the panelists that joined us late in the evening. Thank you to Daisuke, and looking forward to continuing the discussion. And now wish everyone a nice evening here in Sharm el Sheikh.